Saudi Arabia, officially known as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, KSA, is the largest Arab state in Western Asia by land area, approximately 2,150,000 square kilometers, 830,000 square miles, constituting the bulk of the Arabian Peninsula, and the second largest in the Arab world after Algeria. It is bordered by Jordan and Iraq to the north, Kuwait to the northeast, Qatar, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates to the east, Oman to the southeast, and Yemen in the south. It is the only nation with both a Red Sea coast and a Persian Gulf coast. Before the inception of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, modern-day Saudi Arabia consisted of 4 distinct regions: Hejaz, Najd and parts of eastern Arabia, Al-Hasa, and southern Arabia, Asir. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was founded in 1932 by Ibn Saud. He united the 4 regions into a single state through a series of conquests beginning in 1902 with the capture of Riyadh, the ancestral home of his family, the House of Saud. The country has since been an absolute monarchy governed along Islamic lines, namely under the influence of Wahhabism. Saudi Arabia is sometimes called the land of the Two Holy Mosques in reference to Al-Masjid al-Haram, in Mecca, and Al-Masjid an-Nabawi, in Medina, the 2 holiest places in Islam. There are 20 million Saudi citizens and 5 million foreigners living in Saudi Arabia. Most Saudis are Sunni Muslims, approximately 23% are Wahhabis, especially those living in Najd. With the world's second largest oil reserves and the world's 6th largest natural gas reserves, Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil exporter. The kingdom is categorized as a high-income economy with the 19th highest GDP in the world. It is a member of Gulf Cooperation Council, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, G20 major economies and OPEC. A large portion of the landscape is uninhabitable desert. Its economy is largely backed by its oil industry, which accounts for more than 95% of exports and 70% of government revenue, although at the turn of the 21st century the government has attempted to diversify the economy away from the oil sector. Following the unification of the kingdoms of Hejaz and Najd, the new state was named Al-Mamlaka al-Arabiya as-Saudiya, a transliteration of in Arabic, by royal decree on the 23rd of September 1932 by its founder, Abdulaziz al-Saud, Ibn Saud. This is normally translated as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in English, although it literally means the Saudi Arab Kingdom. The word Saudi is derived from the element as-Saudiya in the Arabic name of the country, which is a type of adjective known as a nisbah, formed from the dynastic name of the Saudi royal family, the Al-Saud. Its inclusion indicated that the country's ruler viewed it as the personal possession of the royal family. Al-Saud is an Arabic name formed by adding the word al, meaning family of or house of, to the personal name of an ancestor. In the case of the Al-Saud, this is the father of the dynasty's 18th century founder, Muhammad bin Saud. In pre-Islamic times, apart from a small number of urban trading settlements, such as Mecca and Medina, most of what was to become Saudi Arabia was populated by nomadic tribal societies in the inhospitable desert. The Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, was born in Mecca in about 571. In the early 7th century, Muhammad united the various tribes of the peninsula and created a single Islamic religious polity. Following his death in 632, his followers rapidly expanded the territory under Muslim rule beyond Arabia, conquering huge swathes of territory, from the Iberian Peninsula in west to modern-day Pakistan in east, in a matter of decades. In so doing, Arabia soon became a politically peripheral region of the Muslim world as the focus shifted to the more developed conquered lands. From the 10th century to the early 20th century, Mecca and Medina were under the control of a local Arab ruler known as the Sharif of Mecca, but at most times the Sharif owed allegiance to the ruler of one of the major Islamic empires based in Baghdad, Cairo or Istanbul. Most of the remainder of what became Saudi Arabia reverted to traditional tribal rule. In the 16th century, the Ottomans added the Red Sea and Persian Gulf coast, the Hejaz, Asir and Al-Hasa, to the empire and claimed suzerainty over the interior. One reason was to thwart Portuguese attempts to attack the Red Sea, hence the Hejaz, and the Indian Ocean. Ottoman degree of control over these lands varied over the next 4 centuries with the fluctuating strength or weakness of the empire's central authority. The emergence of what was to become the Saudi royal family, known as the Al Saud, began in Najd in Central Arabia in 1744, when Muhammad bin Saud, founder of the dynasty, joined forces with the religious leader Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, founder of the Wahhabi movement, a strict puritanical form of Sunni Islam. This alliance formed in the 18th century provided the ideological impetus to Saudi expansion and remains the basis of Saudi Arabian dynastic rule today. The first Saudi state established in 1744 in the area around Riyadh, rapidly expanded and briefly controlled most of the present-day territory of Saudi Arabia, but it was destroyed by 1818 by the Ottoman Viceroy of Egypt, Muhammad Ali Pasha. A much smaller second Saudi state, located mainly in Najd, was established in 1824. Throughout the rest of the 19th century, the Al Saud contested control of the interior of what was to become Saudi Arabia with another Arabian ruling family, the Al-Rashid. By 1891, the Al-Rashid were victorious and the Al Saud were driven into exile in Kuwait, where the younger son of Faisal bin Turki bin Abdullah Al Saud, Prince Abdul Rahman bin Faisal, was greeted during the reign of Abdullah II Saber to Al-Jabri al-Saber. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire continued to control or have a suzerainty over most of the peninsula. Subject to this suzerainty, Arabia was ruled by a patchwork of tribal rulers, with the Sharif of Mecca having preeminence and ruling the Hejaz. In 1902, Abdul Rahman's son, Abdul Aziz, later to be known as Ibn Saud, recaptured control of Riyadh and Najd during the reign of Mubarak Saber to Al-Jabri al-Saber, bringing the Al Saud back to Najd. Ibn Saud gained the support of the Ikhwan, a tribal army inspired by Wahhabism and led by Faisal al-Dawish, and which had grown quickly after its foundation in 1912. With the aid of the Ikhwan, Ibn Saud captured Hassa from the Ottomans in 1913. In 1916, with the encouragement and support of Britain, which was fighting the Ottomans in World War I, the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein bin Ali, led a pan-Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire to create a United Arab State. Although the Arab Revolt of 1916 to 1918 failed in its objective, the Allied victory in World War I resulted in the end of Ottoman suzerainty and control in Arabia. Ibn Saud avoided involvement in the Arab Revolt, and instead continued his struggle with the Al-Rashid. Following the latter's final defeat, he took the title Sultan of Najd in 1921. With the help of the Ikhwan, the Hejaz was conquered in 1924-25, and on the 10th of January 1926, Ibn Saud declared himself king of the Hejaz. A year later, he added the title of king of Najd. For the next 5 years, he administered the two parts of his dual kingdom as separate units. After the conquest of the Hejaz, the Ikhwan leadership's objectives switched to expansion of the Wahhabist realm into the British protectorates of Transjordan, Iraq and Kuwait, and began raiding those territories. This met with Ibn Saud's opposition, as he recognized the danger of a direct conflict with the British. At the same time, the Ikhwan became disenchanted with Ibn Saud's domestic policies, which appeared to favor modernization and the increase in the number of non-Muslim foreigners in the country. As a result, they turned against Ibn Saud and, after a 2-year struggle, were defeated in 1930 at the Battle of Sibilla, where their leaders were massacred. In 1932, the two kingdoms of the Hejaz and Najd were united as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Post-unification, the new kingdom was one of the poorest countries in the world, reliant on limited agriculture and pilgrimage revenues. However, in 1938, vast reserves of oil were discovered in the Al-Hasa region along the coast of the Persian Gulf, and full-scale development of the oil fields began in 1941 under the US-controlled Aramco, Arabian American Oil Company. Oil provided Saudi Arabia with economic prosperity and substantial political leverage internationally. Cultural life rapidly developed, primarily in the Hejaz, which was the center for newspapers and radio. However, the large influx of foreigners to work in the oil industry increased the pre-existing propensity for xenophobia. At the same time, the government became increasingly wasteful and extravagant. By the 1950s this had led to large governmental deficits and excessive foreign borrowing. King Saud succeeded to the throne on his father's death in 1953. However, an intense rivalry between the king and his half-brother, Prince Faisal, emerged, fueled by doubts in the royal family over Saud's competence. As a consequence, Saud was deposed in favor of Faisal in 1964. Saudi Arabia gained control of a proportion, 20%, of Aramco in 1972, thereby decreasing U.S. control over Saudi oil. In 1973, Saudi Arabia led an oil boycott against the Western countries that supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War against Egypt and Syria. Oil prices quadrupled. Faisal was assassinated in 1975 by his nephew, Prince Faisal bin Musaid, and was succeeded by his half-brother King Khalid. By 1976 Saudi Arabia had become the largest oil producer in the world. Khalid's reign saw economic and social development progress at an extremely rapid rate, transforming the infrastructure and educational system of the country. In foreign policy, close ties with the U.S. were developed. In 1979, two events occurred which greatly concerned the government, and had a long-term influence on Saudi foreign and domestic policy. The first was the Iranian Islamic Revolution. It was feared that the country's Shiite minority in the eastern province, which is also the location of the oil fields, might rebel under the influence of their Iranian co-religionists. In fact, there were several anti-government uprisings in the region in 1979 and 1980. The second event was the seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca by Islamist extremists. The militants involved were in part angered by what they considered to be the corruption and un-Islamic nature of the Saudi government. The government regained control of the mosque after 10 days and those captured were executed. Part of the response of the royal family was to enforce a much stricter observance of traditional religious and social norms in the country, for example, the closure of cinemas, and to give the ulama a greater role in government. Neither entirely succeeded as Islamism continued to grow in strength. In 1980, Saudi Arabia took full control of Aramco from the U.S. King Khalid died of a heart attack in June 1982, and was succeeded by his brother, King Fahd, who added the title custodian of the Two Holy Mosques to his name in 1986. Fahd continued to develop close relations with the United States and increased the purchase of American and British military equipment. The vast wealth generated by oil revenues was beginning to have an even greater impact on Saudi society. It led to rapid modernization, urbanization, mass public education and the creation of new media. This and the presence of increasingly large numbers of foreign workers greatly affected traditional Saudi norms and values. Although there was dramatic change in the social and economic life of the country, political power continued to be monopolized by the royal family, leading to discontent among many Saudis who began to look for wider participation in government. In the 1980s, Saudi Arabia spent $25 billion in support of Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq War. However, Saudi Arabia condemned the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990 and asked the U.S. to intervene. King Fahd allowed American and coalition troops to be stationed in Saudi Arabia. He invited the Kuwaiti government and many of its citizens to stay in Saudi Arabia, but expelled citizens of Yemen and Jordan because of their government's support of Iraq. In 1991, Saudi Arabian forces were involved both in bombing raids on Iraq and in the land invasion that helped to liberate Kuwait. Saudi Arabia's relations with the West began to cause growing concern among some of the ulama and students of Sharia law, and was one of the issues that led to an increase in Islamic terrorism in Saudi Arabia, as well as Islamic terrorist attacks in Western countries by Saudi nationals. Osama bin Laden was a Saudi national, until stripped of his nationality in 1994. 15 of the 19 hijackers involved in 9/11 attacks on New York, Washington and Virginia were Saudi nationals. Many Saudis who did not support the Islamist terrorists were nevertheless deeply unhappy with the government's policies. Islamism was not the only source of hostility to the government. Although now extremely wealthy, Saudi Arabia's economy was near stagnant. High taxes and a growth in unemployment have contributed to discontent, and has been reflected in a rise in civil unrest. and discontent with the royal family. In response, a number of limited reforms were initiated by King Fahd. In March 1992, he introduced the Basic Law, which emphasized the duties and responsibilities of a ruler. In December 1993, the Consultative Council was inaugurated. It is composed of a chairman and 60 members, all chosen by the king. The king's intent was to respond to dissent while making as few actual changes in the status quo as possible. Fahd made it clear that he did not have democracy in mind. A system based on elections is not consistent with our Islamic creed, which approves of government by consultation, shura. In 1995, Fahd suffered a debilitating stroke, and the Crown Prince, Abdullah, assumed the role of de facto regent, taking on the day-to-day running of the country. However, his authority was hindered by conflict with Fahd's full brothers, known, with Fahd, as the Sudari Seven. From the 1990s, signs of discontent continued and included, in 2003 and 2004, a series of bombings and armed violence in Riyadh, Jeddah, Yanbu and Qatar. In February to April 2005, the first ever nationwide municipal elections were held in Saudi Arabia. Women were not allowed to take part in the poll. In 2005, King Fahd died and was succeeded by Abdullah, who continued the policy of minimum reform and clamping down on protests. The king introduced a number of economic reforms aimed at reducing the country's reliance on oil revenue, limited deregulation, encouragement of foreign investment, and privatization. In February 2009, Abdullah announced a series of governmental changes to the judiciary, armed forces, and various ministries to modernize these institutions, including the replacement of senior appointees in the judiciary and the Muto'in, religious police, with more moderate individuals, and the appointment of the country's first female deputy minister. On the 29th of January 2011, hundreds of protesters gathered in the city of Jeddah in a rare display of criticism against the city's poor infrastructure after deadly floods swept through the city, killing 11 people. Police stopped the demonstration after about 15 minutes and arrested 30 to 50 people. Since 2011, Saudi Arabia has been affected by its own Arab Spring protests. In response, King Abdullah announced on the 22nd of February 2011 a series of benefits for citizens amounting to $36 billion, of which $10.7 billion was earmarked for housing. No political reforms were announced as part of the package, though some prisoners indicted for financial crimes were pardoned. On 18 March the same year, King Abdullah announced a package of $93 billion, which included 500,000 new homes to a cost of $67 billion, in addition to creating 60,000 new security jobs. Although male-only municipal elections were held on the 29th of September 2011, Abdullah announced that women will be able to vote and be elected in the 2015 municipal elections, and also to be nominated to the Shura Council. Politics. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. However, according to the Basic Law of Saudi Arabia adopted by royal decree in 1992, the king must comply with Sharia, Islamic law, and the Quran, while the Quran and the Sunnah, the traditions of Muhammad, are declared to be the country's constitution. No political parties or national elections are permitted, and according to The Economist's 2010 Democracy Index, the Saudi government is the seventh most authoritarian from among the 167 countries rated. In the absence of national elections and political parties, politics in Saudi Arabia takes place in two distinct arenas: within the royal family, the Al Saud, and between the royal family and the rest of Saudi society. Outside of the Al Saud, participation in the political process is limited to a relatively small segment of the population and takes the form of the royal family consulting with the ulama, tribal sheikhs and members of important commercial families on major decisions. This process is not reported by the Saudi media. Saudi army arrived in Jizan to fight Houthis militia. By custom, all males of full age have a right to petition the king directly through the traditional tribal meeting known as the Majlis. In many ways the approach to government differs little from the traditional system of tribal rule. Tribal identity remains strong and, outside of the royal family, political influence is frequently determined by tribal affiliation. with tribal sheikhs maintaining a considerable degree of influence over local and national events. As mentioned earlier, in recent years there have been limited steps to widen political participation, such as the establishment of the Consultative Council in the early 1990s and the National Dialogue Forum in 2003. The rule of the Al-Saud faces political opposition from four sources: Sunni Islamist activism, liberal critics, the Shiite minority, particularly in the eastern province, and long-standing tribal and regionalist particularistic opponents, for example in the Hejaz. Of these, the Islamic activists have been the most prominent threat to the government and have in recent years perpetrated a number of violent or terrorist acts in the country. However, open protest against the government, even if peaceful, is not tolerated. Saudi Arabia is the only country in the world which bans women from driving. On the 25th of September 2011, Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah has announced that women will have the right to stand and vote in future local elections and join the Advisory Shura Council as full members. Monarchy and royal family. The king combines legislative, executive, and judicial functions, and royal decrees form the basis of the country's legislation. The king is also the prime minister, and presides over the Council of Ministers, Majlis al-Wuzara, which comprises the first and second deputy prime ministers and other ministers. The royal family dominates the political system. The family's vast numbers allow it to control most of the kingdom's important posts and to have an involvement and presence at all levels of government. The number of princes is estimated to be at least 7,000, with most power and influence being wielded by the 200 or so male descendants of Ibn Saud. The key ministries are generally reserved for the royal family, as are the 13 regional governorships. Long-term political and government appointments have resulted in the creation of power fiefdoms for senior princes, such as those of King Abdullah, who had been commander of the National Guard since 1963. Until 2010, when he appointed his son to replace him, former Crown Prince Sultan, Minister of Defense and Aviation from 1962 to his death in 2011, former Crown Prince Naif, who was the Minister of Interior from 1975 to his death in 2012, Prince Saud, who has been Minister of Foreign Affairs since 1975, and current Minister of Defense and Aviation Prince Salman, who was governor of the Riyadh province from 1962 to 2011. The royal family is politically divided by factions based on clan loyalties, personal ambitions and ideological differences. The most powerful clan faction is known as the Sudari Seven, comprising the late King Fahd and his full brothers and their descendants. Ideological divisions include issues over the speed and direction of reform, and whether the role of the ulama should be increased or reduced. There were divisions within the family over who should succeed to the throne after the accession or earlier death of Prince Sultan. When Prince Sultan died before ascending to the throne on the 21st of October 2011, King Abdullah appointed Prince Naif as Crown Prince. Prince Naif also died before ascending to the throne in 2012. The Saudi government and the royal family have often, over many years, been accused of corruption. In a country that is said to belong to the royal family and is named for them, the lines between state assets and the personal wealth of senior princes are blurred. The extent of corruption has been described as systemic and endemic, and its existence was acknowledged and defended by Prince Bandar bin Sultan, a senior member of the royal family, in an interview in 2001. Although corruption allegations have often been limited to broad undocumented accusations, specific allegations were made in 2007, when it was claimed that the British defense contractor B Systems had paid Prince Bandar $2 billion in bribes relating to the Al-Yamama arms deal. Prince Bandar denied the allegations. Investigations by both US and UK authorities resulted, in 2010, in plea bargain agreements with the company, by which it paid $447 million in fines but did not admit to bribery. Transparency International, in its annual Corruption Perceptions Index for 2010, gave Saudi Arabia a score of 4.7, on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is highly corrupt and 10 is highly clean. Saudi Arabia has undergone a process of political and social reform, such as to increase public transparency and good governance. However, there are still some areas that are prone to corruption, such as public procurement. The occurrence of irregular payments and bribes are still common, representing potential difficulties for doing business in Saudi Arabia. There has been mounting pressure to reform and modernize the royal family's rule, an agenda championed by King Abdullah both before and after his accession in 2005. The creation of the Consultative Council in the early 1990s did not satisfy demands for political participation, and, in 2003, an annual National Dialogue Forum was announced that would allow selected professionals and intellectuals to publicly debate current national issues, within certain prescribed parameters. In 2005, the first municipal elections were held. In 2007, the Allegiance Council was created to regulate the succession. In 2009, the king made significant personnel changes to the government by appointing reformers to key positions and the first woman to a ministerial post. However, the changes have been criticized as being too slow or merely cosmetic. Al-Ash Sheikh and role of the ulama. Saudi Arabia is almost unique in giving the ulama, the body of Islamic religious leaders and jurists, a direct role in government, the only other example being Iran. The ulama have also been a key influence in major government decisions, for example the imposition of the oil embargo in 1973 and the invitation to foreign troops to Saudi Arabia in 1990. In addition, they have had a major role in the judicial and education systems and a monopoly of authority in the sphere of religious and social morals. By the 1970s, as a result of oil wealth and the modernization of the country initiated by King Faisal, important changes to Saudi society were underway and the power of the ulama was in decline. However, this changed following the seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca in 1979 by Islamist radicals. The government's response to the crisis included strengthening the ulama's powers and increasing their financial support. In particular, they were given greater control over the education system and allowed to enforce stricter observance of Wahhabi rules of moral and social behavior. Since his accession to the throne in 2005, King Abdullah has taken steps to reduce the powers of the ulama, for instance transferring control over girls' education to the Ministry of Education. The ulama have historically been led by the Al-Ash Sheikh, the country's leading religious family. The Al-Ash Sheikh are the descendants of Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, the 18th century founder of the Wahhabi form of Sunni Islam which is today dominant in Saudi Arabia. The family is second in prestige only to the Al Saud, the royal family, with whom they formed a mutual support pact and power-sharing arrangement nearly 300 years ago. The pact, which persists to this day, is based on the Al Saud maintaining the Al-Ash Sheikh's authority in religious matters and upholding and propagating Wahhabi doctrine. In return, the Al-Ash Sheikh support the Al Saud's political authority, thereby using its religious moral authority to legitimize the royal family's rule. Although the Al-Ash Sheikh's domination of the ulama has diminished in recent decades, they still hold the most important religious posts and are closely linked to the Al Saud by a high degree of intermarriage. The primary source of law is the Islamic Sharia derived from the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, the traditions of the Prophet. Saudi Arabia is unique among most modern Muslim states in that Sharia is not codified and there is no system of judicial precedent, giving judges the power to use independent legal reasoning to make a decision. Saudi judges tend to follow the principles of the Hanbali school of jurisprudence, or fiqh, found in pre-modern texts and noted for its literalist interpretation of the Quran and Hadith. Because the judge is empowered to disregard previous judgments, either his own or of other judges, and may apply his personal interpretation of Sharia to any particular case, divergent judgments arise even in apparently identical cases, making predictability of legal interpretation difficult. The Sharia court system constitutes the basic judiciary of Saudi Arabia, and its judges, qadi, and lawyers form part of the ulama, the country's Islamic scholars. Royal decrees are the other main source of law, but are referred to as regulations rather than laws because they are subordinate to the Sharia. Royal decrees supplement Sharia in areas such as labor, commercial and corporate law. Additionally, traditional tribal law and custom remain significant. Extra-Sharia government tribunals usually handle disputes relating to specific royal decrees. Final appeal from both Sharia courts and government tribunals is to the king, and all courts and tribunals follow Sharia rules of evidence and procedure. The Saudi system of justice has been criticized for being slow, arcane, lacking in some of the safeguards of justice, and unable to deal with the modern world. Saudi justice has been criticized for ultra-puritanical judges, being often harsh, with beheading for the crime of witchcraft, but sometimes lenient, for cases of rape or wife-beating, and slow, for example leaving thousands of abandoned women unable to secure a divorce. In 2007, King Abdullah issued royal decrees reforming the judiciary and creating a new court system, and, in 2009, the king made a number of significant changes to the judiciary's personnel at the most senior level by bringing in a younger generation. Capital and physical punishments imposed by Saudi courts, such as beheading, stoning to death, amputation and lashing, as well as the sheer number of executions, have been strongly criticized. The death penalty can be imposed for a wide range of offenses including murder, rape, armed robbery, repeated drug use, apostasy, adultery, witchcraft and sorcery, and can be carried out by beheading with a sword, stoning or firing squad, followed by crucifixion. The 345 reported executions between 2007 and 2010 were all carried out by public beheading. The last reported execution for sorcery took place in June 2012. Although repeated theft can be punishable by amputation of the right hand, only one instance of judicial amputation was reported between 2007 and 2010. Homosexual acts are punishable by flogging or death. Atheism or calling into question the fundamentals of the Islamic religion on which this country is based is considered a terrorist crime. Lashings are a common form of punishment and are often imposed for offenses against religion and public morality such as drinking alcohol and neglect of prayer and fasting obligations. Retaliatory punishments, or qisas, are practiced. For instance, an eye can be surgically removed at the insistence of a victim who lost his own eye. Families of someone unlawfully killed can choose between demanding the death penalty or granting clemency in return for a payment of diya, or blood money, by the perpetrator. Human rights. Western-based organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch condemn both the Saudi criminal justice system and its severe punishments. There are no jury trials in Saudi Arabia and courts observe few formalities. Human Rights Watch, in a 2008 report, noted that a criminal procedure code had been introduced for the first time in 2002, but it lacked some basic protections and, in any case, had been routinely ignored by judges. Those arrested are often not informed of the crime of which they are accused or given access to a lawyer, and are subject to abusive treatment and torture if they do not confess. At trial, there is a presumption of guilt and the accused is often unable to examine witnesses and evidence or present a legal defense. Most trials are held in secret. However, ordinary Saudis, according to a BBC report, support the system and say that it maintains a low crime rate. Saudi Arabia has long been criticized for its human rights record. Human rights issues that have attracted strong criticism include the extremely disadvantaged position of women. See women in Saudi society below. Capital punishment for homosexuality, religious discrimination, the lack of religious freedom and the activities of the religious police. See religion below. Between 1996 and 2000, Saudi Arabia acceded to 4 UN human rights conventions and, in 2004, the government approved the establishment of the National Society for Human Rights, NSHR, staffed by government employees, to monitor their implementation. To date, the activities of the NSHR have been limited and doubts remain over its neutrality and independence. Saudi Arabia remains one of the very few countries in the world not to accept the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In response to the continuing criticism of its human rights record, the Saudi government points to the special Islamic character of the country, and asserts that this justifies a different social and political order. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom had unsuccessfully urged President Barack Obama to raise human rights concerns with King Abdullah on his March 2014 visit to the kingdom, especially the imprisonments of Sultan Hamid Marzouk al-Ennetsi, Saud Falahwad al-Ennetsi, and Raif Badawi. Saudi Arabia joined the UN in 1945 and is a founding member of the Arab League, Gulf Cooperation Council, Muslim World League, and the Organization of the Islamic Conference, now the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It plays a prominent role in the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and in 2005 joined the World Trade Organization. Saudi Arabia supports the intended formation of the Arab Customs Union in 2015 and an Arab Common Market by 2020, as announced at the 2009 Arab League Summit. As a founding member of OPEC, its oil pricing policy has been generally to stabilize the world oil market and try to moderate sharp price movements so as to not jeopardize the Western economies. Between the mid-1970s and 2002, Saudi Arabia expended over $70 billion in overseas development aid. However, there is evidence that the vast majority was, in fact, spent on propagating and extending the influence of Wahhabism at the expense of other forms of Islam. There has been an intense debate over whether Saudi aid and Wahhabism has fomented extremism in recipient countries. The two main allegations are that, by its nature, Wahhabism encourages intolerance and promotes terrorism. Relations with the United States became strained following 9/11. American politicians and the media accused the Saudi government of supporting terrorism and tolerating a jihadist culture. Indeed, Osama bin Laden and 15 out of the 19 9/11 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. According to former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Saudi Arabia remains a critical financial support base for Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, led and other terrorist groups. Donors in Saudi Arabia constitute the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. Former CIA Director James Woolsey described it as the soil in which Al-Qaeda and its sister terrorist organizations are flourishing. However, the Saudi government strenuously denies these claims or that it exports religious or cultural extremism. In the Arab and Muslim worlds, Saudi Arabia is considered to be pro-Western and pro-American, and it is certainly a long-term ally of the United States. However, this and Saudi Arabia's role in the 1991 Persian Gulf War, particularly the stationing of U.S. troops on Saudi soil from 1991, prompted the development of a hostile Islamist response internally. As a result, Saudi Arabia has, to some extent, distanced itself from the U.S. and, for example, refused to support or to participate in the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. Recent years have seen increasing alarm within the Saudi monarchy over the rise of Iran's influence in the region, reflected in the reported private comments of King Abdullah urging the U.S. to attack Iran and cut off the head of the snake. The tentative rapprochement between the U.S. and Iran that began in secret in 2011 was said to be feared by the Saudis, and, during the run-up to the widely welcomed deal on Iran's nuclear program that capped the first stage of U.S.-Iranian détente, Robert Jordan, who was U.S. ambassador to Riyadh from 2001 to 2003, said, Saudi's worst nightmare would be the Obama administration striking a grand bargain with Iran. A trip to Saudi by U.S. President Barack Obama in 2014 included discussions of U.S.-Iran relations, though these failed to resolve Riyadh's concerns. Saudi Arabia has been seen as a moderating influence in the Arab-Israeli conflict, periodically putting forward a peace plan between Israel and the Palestinians and condemning Hezbollah. Following the Arab Spring, Saudi Arabia offered asylum to deposed President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali of Tunisia, and King Abdullah telephoned President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, prior to his deposition, to offer his support. In early 2014, relations with Qatar became strained over its support for the Muslim Brotherhood, and Saudi Arabia's belief that Qatar was interfering in its affairs. In August 2014, both countries appeared to be exploring ways of ending the rift. Saudi Arabia has the highest percentage of military expenditure in the world, spending more than 10% of its GDP in its military. The Saudi military consists of the Royal Saudi Land Forces, the Royal Saudi Air Force, the Royal Saudi Navy, the Royal Saudi Air Defense, the Saudi Arabian National Guard, SANG, an independent military force, and paramilitary forces, totaling nearly 200,000 active duty personnel. In 2005 the armed forces had the following personnel: the Army, 75,000, the Air Force, 18,000, Air Defense, 16,000, the Navy, 15,500, including 3,000 Marines, and the SANG had 75,000 active soldiers and 25,000 tribal levies. In addition, there is an Al-Mukhabarat Alama military intelligence service. The kingdom has a long-standing military relationship with Pakistan. It has long been speculated that Saudi Arabia secretly funded Pakistan's atomic bomb program and seeks to purchase atomic weapons from Pakistan in near future. The SANG is not a reserve but a fully operational frontline force, and originated out of Ibn Saud's tribal military religious force, the Ikhwan. Its modern existence, however, is attributable to it being effectively Abdullah's private army since the 1960s and, unlike the rest of the armed forces, is independent of the Ministry of Defense and Aviation. The SANG has been a counterbalance to the Sudari faction in the royal family. Prince Sultan, the Minister of Defense and Aviation, is one of the so-called Sudari Seven and controls the remainder of the armed forces. Spending on defense and security has increased significantly since the mid-1990s and was about $25.4 billion in 2005. Saudi Arabia ranks among the top 10 in the world in government spending for its military, representing about 7% of gross domestic product in 2005. Its modern high-technology arsenal makes Saudi Arabia among the world's most densely armed nations, with its military equipment being supplied primarily by the US, France and Britain. The United States sold more than $80 billion in military hardware between 1951 and 2006 to the Saudi military. On the 20th of October 2010, the U.S. State Department notified Congress of its intention to make the biggest arms sale in American history, an estimated $60.5 billion purchase by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The package represents a considerable improvement in the offensive capability of the Saudi armed forces. 2013 saw Saudi military spending climb to $67 billion, overtaking that of the UK, France and Japan to place fourth globally. The UK has also been a major supplier of military equipment to Saudi Arabia since 1965. Since 1985, the UK has supplied military aircraft, notably the Tornado and Eurofighter Typhoon combat aircraft, and other equipment as part of the long-term Al-Yamama arms deal estimated to have been worth £43 billion by 2006 and thought to be worth a further £40 billion. In May 2012, British defence giant B signed a £1.9 billion, $3 billion, deal to supply Hawk trainer jets to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia occupies about 80% of the Arabian Peninsula, lying between latitudes 16 degrees and 33 degrees N, and longitudes 34 degrees and 56 degrees E. Because the country's southern borders with the United Arab Emirates and Oman are not precisely defined or marked, the exact size of the country remains unknown. The CIA World Factbook's estimate is 2,250,000 square kilometers, 868,730 square miles, and lists Saudi Arabia as the world's 13th largest state. Saudi Arabia's geography is dominated by the Arabian Desert and associated semi-desert and shrubland. See satellite images to right. It is, in fact, a number of linked deserts and includes the 647,500 square kilometers, 250,001 square miles, Rub al-Khali, empty quarter, in the southern part of the country, the world's largest contiguous sand desert. There are virtually no rivers or lakes in the country, but wadis are numerous. The few fertile areas are to be found in the alluvial deposits in wadis, basins, and oases. The main topographical feature is the central plateau, which rises abruptly from the Red Sea and gradually descends into the Najd and toward the Persian Gulf. On the Red Sea coast, there is a narrow coastal plain, known as the Tihama, parallel to which runs an imposing escarpment. The southwest province of Asir is mountainous, and contains the 3,133 meters, 10,279 feet, Mount Saud, which is the highest point in the country. Except for the southwestern province of Asir, Saudi Arabia has a desert climate with extremely high daytime temperatures and a sharp temperature drop at night. Average summer temperatures are around 113 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 degrees Celsius, but can be as high as 129 degrees Fahrenheit, 54 degrees Celsius. In the winter the temperature rarely drops below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. In the spring and autumn the heat is temperate. Temperatures average around 84 degrees Fahrenheit, 29 degrees Celsius. Annual rainfall is extremely low. The Asir region differs in that it is influenced by the Indian Ocean monsoons, usually occurring between October and March. An average of 300 mm, 12 in, of rainfall occurs during this period. That is about 60% of the annual precipitation. Animal life includes wolves, hyenas, mongooses, baboons, hares, sand rats, and jerboas. Larger animals such as gazelles, oryx, and leopards were relatively numerous until the 1950s, when hunting from motor vehicles reduced these animals almost to extinction. Birds include falcons, which are caught and trained for hunting, eagles, hawks, vultures, sand grouse and bulbuls. There are several species of snakes, many of which are venomous, and numerous types of lizards. There is a wide variety of marine life in the Persian Gulf. Domesticated animals include camels, sheep, goats, donkeys, and chickens. Reflecting the country's desert conditions, Saudi Arabia's plant life mostly consists of small herbs and shrubs requiring little water. There are a few small areas of grass and trees in southern Asir. The date palm, Phoenix dactylifera, is widespread. Administrative divisions. Saudi Arabia is divided into 13 provinces, Manatik Idriya, singular Mintaka Idriya. The provinces are further divided into 118 governorates, Arabic, Manatik Idriya, This number includes the 13 provincial capitals, which have a different status as municipalities, Amana, headed by mayors, Amin. The governorates are further subdivided into sub-governorates, Maracas, Singh, Markaz. Saudi Arabia's command economy is petroleum-based. Roughly 75% of budget revenues and 90% of export earnings come from the oil industry. The oil industry comprises about 45% of Saudi Arabia's nominal gross domestic product, compared with 40% from the private sector. See below. Saudi Arabia officially has about 260 billion barrels, 4.1 times 1010 cubic meters, of oil reserves, comprising about 1/5 of the world's proven total petroleum reserves. The government is attempting to promote growth in the private sector by privatizing industries such as power and telecommunications. Saudi Arabia announced plans to begin privatizing the electricity companies in 1999, which followed the ongoing privatization of the telecommunications company. Shortages of water and rapid population growth may constrain government efforts to increase self-sufficiency in agricultural products. In the 1990s, Saudi Arabia experienced a significant contraction of oil revenues combined with a higher rate of population growth. Per capita income fell from a high of $11,700 at the height of the oil boom in 1981 to $6,300 in 1998. Increases in oil prices since 2000 have helped boost per capita GDP to $17,000 in 2007, or about $7,400 adjusted for inflation. Taking into account the impact of the real oil price changes on the kingdom's real gross domestic income, The real command basis GDP was computed to be $330.381 billion, $1,999 in 2010. Oil price increases of 2008 to 2009 have triggered a second oil boom, pushing Saudi Arabia's budget surplus to $28 billion, 110 SR billion, in 2005. Oil, the Saudi stock market index, finished 2004 with a massive 76.23% to close at 4,437.58 points. Market capitalization was up 110.14% from a year earlier to stand at $157.3 billion, 589.93 SR billion, which makes it the biggest stock market in the Middle East. OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, limits its members' oil production based on their proven reserves. Saudi Arabia's published reserves have shown little change since 1980, with the main exception being an increase of about 100 billion barrels, 1.6 times 1010 cubic meters, between 1987 and 1988. Matthew Simmons had suggested that Saudi Arabia is greatly exaggerating its reserves and may soon show production declines. See peak oil. Saudi Arabia is one of only a few fast-growing countries in the world with a relatively high per capita income of $24,200. 2010. Saudi Arabia will be launching 6 economic cities, for example King Abdullah Economic City, which are planned to be completed by 2020. These 6 new industrialized cities are intended to diversify the economy of Saudi Arabia, and are expected to increase the per capita income. The King of Saudi Arabia has announced that the per capita income is forecast to rise from $15,000 in 2006 to $33,500 in 2020. The cities will be spread around Saudi Arabia to promote diversification for each region and their economy, and the cities are projected to contribute $150 billion to the GDP. However, the urban areas of Riyadh and Jeddah are expected to contribute $287 billion by the year 2020. Gold mining is carried out in the Dahab region, also known as the Cradle of Gold. Saudi Arabian stores suffered a significant decrease in gold sales in 2012. Reporting of poverty remains a state taboo. In December 2011, days after the Arab Spring uprisings, the Saudi Interior Ministry detained reporter Feroz Bokhna and 2 colleagues and held them for almost 2 weeks for questioning after they uploaded a video on the topic to YouTube. Statistics on the issue are not available through the UN resources because the Saudi government does not issue poverty figures. Observers researching the issue prefer to stay anonymous because of the risk of being arrested. 3 journalists, Feroz Bokhna, Hassam al-Ruesh and Khaled al-Rashid, were detained after posting 10-minute film Al-3 Ob 3 Alina, or We Are Being on Saudis Living in Poverty to YouTube. Authors of the video claim that 22% of Saudis are considered to be poor, 2009, and 70% of Saudis do not own their houses. In recent years, Saudi Arabia sought to join the World Trade Organization. Negotiations have focused on the degree to which Saudi Arabia is willing to increase market access to foreign goods and services and the timeframe for becoming fully compliant with World Trade Organization obligations. In April 2000, the government established the Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority to encourage foreign direct investment in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia maintains a negative list of sectors in which foreign investment is prohibited, but the government plans to open some closed sectors such as telecommunications, insurance, and power transmission, distribution over time. As of November 2005, Saudi Arabia was officially approved to enter World Trade Organization. Demographics. The population of Saudi Arabia as of July 2013 is estimated to be 26.9 million, including 5.5 million non-nationals. In 1950, Saudi Arabia had a population of 3 million. The ethnic composition of Saudi citizens is 90% Arab and 10% Afro-Asian. Most Saudis live in Hejaz, 35%, Najd, 28%, and the Eastern Province, 15%. Hejaz is the most populated region in Saudi Arabia. The CIA Factbook estimated that as of 2013 foreign nationals living in Saudi Arabia made up about 21% of the population. Other sources report differing estimates. Indian, 1.3 million, Pakistani, 1.5 million, Egyptian, 900,000, Yemeni, 800,000, Bangladeshi, 500,000, Filipino, 500,000, Jordanian/Palestinian, 260,000, Indonesian, 250,000, Sri Lankan, 350,000, Sudanese, 250,000, Syrian, 100,000 and Turkish, 100,000. There are around 100,000 Westerners in Saudi Arabia, most of whom live in compounds or gated communities. Saudi Arabia expelled 800,000 Yemenis in 1990 and 1991. An estimated 240,000 Palestinians are living in Saudi Arabia. They are not allowed to hold or even apply for Saudi citizenship, because of Arab League instructions barring the Arab states from granting them citizenship. The only other alternative for them is to marry a Saudi national. Palestinians are the sole foreign group that cannot benefit from a 2004 law passed by Saudi Arabia's Council of Ministers, which entitles expatriates of all nationalities who have resided in the kingdom for 10 years to apply for citizenship, with priority being given to holders of degrees in various scientific fields. The Articles 12.4 and 14.1 of the Executive Regulation of Saudi Citizenship System can be interpreted as requiring applicants to be Muslim. As recently as the early 1960s, Saudi Arabia's slave population was estimated at 300,000. Slavery was officially abolished in 1962. In a 2011 news story, Arab News reported, nearly 3 million expatriate workers will have to leave the kingdom in the next few years as the Labour Ministry has put a 20% ceiling on the country's guest workers. The Saudi-Yemen barrier was constructed by Saudi Arabia against an influx of illegal immigrants and against the smuggling of drugs and weapons. In November 2013, Saudi Arabia expelled thousands of illegal Ethiopians from the kingdom. Various human rights entities have criticized Saudi Arabia's handling of the issue. Languages. The official language of Saudi Arabia is Arabic. The three main regional variants spoken by Saudis are Hejazi Arabic, about 6 million speakers, Najdi Arabic, about 8 million speakers, and Gulf Arabic, about 0.2 million speakers. Saudi Sign Language is the principal language of the deaf community. The large expatriate communities also speak their own languages, the most numerous being Tagalog, 700,000, Rohingya, 400,000, Urdu, 380,000, and Egyptian Arabic, 300,000. There are about 25 million people who are Muslim, or 97% of the total population. However, excluding foreign workers, about 100% of its population is Muslim. Data for Saudi Arabia comes primarily from general population surveys, which are less reliable than censuses or large-scale demographic and health surveys for estimating minority-majority ratios. About 85 to 90% of Saudis are Sunni, while Shias represent around 10 to 15% of the Muslim population. The official and dominant form of Sunni Islam in Saudi Arabia is commonly known as Wahhabism, a name which some of its proponents consider derogatory, preferring the term Salafism. Founded in the Arabian Peninsula by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab in the 18th century, is often described as puritanical, intolerant or ultra-conservative. However, proponents consider that its teachings seek to purify the practice of Islam of any innovations or practices that deviate from the 7th century teachings of the Islamic prophet Muhammad and his companions. According to Human Rights Watch, the Shia minority face systematic discrimination from the Saudi government in education, the justice system and especially religious freedom. Shias also face discrimination in employment, and restrictions are imposed on the public celebration of Shia festivals such as Ashura and on the Shia taking part in communal public worship. In 2010, The U.S. State Department stated that in Saudi Arabia freedom of religion is neither recognized nor protected under the law and is severely restricted in practice, and that government policies continue to place severe restrictions on religious freedom. No faith other than Islam is permitted to be practiced, although there are nearly 1 million Christians, nearly all foreign workers. In Saudi Arabia, there are no churches or other non-Muslim houses of worship permitted in the country. Even private prayer services are forbidden in practice, and the Saudi religious police reportedly regularly search the homes of Christians. Foreign workers have to observe Ramadan but are not allowed to celebrate Christmas or Easter. In 2007, Human Rights Watch requested that King Abdullah stop a campaign to round up and deport foreign followers of the Ahmadiyya faith. Conversion by Muslims to another religion, apostasy, carries the death penalty, although there have been no confirmed reports of executions for apostasy in recent years. Proselytizing by non-Muslims is illegal, and the last Christian priest was expelled from Saudi Arabia in 1985. There are some Hindus and Buddhists in Saudi Arabia. Compensation in court cases discriminates against non-Muslims. Once fault is determined, a Muslim receives all of the amount of compensation determined, a Jew or Christian half, and all others a 16th. Saudi Arabia has officially identified atheists as terrorists. The regulations place secular citizens who commit thought crimes in the same category as violent terrorist groups. Saudi Arabia has centuries-old attitudes and traditions, often derived from Arab civilization. This culture has been bolstered by the austerely puritanical Wahhabi form of Islam, which rose in the 18th century and now predominates in the country. The many limitations on behavior and dress are strictly enforced both legally and socially. Alcoholic beverages are prohibited, for example, and there is no theater or public exhibition of films. However, the Daily Mail and WikiLeaks indicate that the Saudi royal family applies a different moral code to itself. WikiLeaks cables: Saudi princes throw parties boasting drink, drugs and sex. Royals flout puritanical laws to throw parties for young elite while religious police are forced to turn a blind eye. Public expression of opinion about domestic political or social matters is discouraged. There are no organizations such as political parties or labor unions to provide public forums. Daily life is dominated by Islamic observance. 5 times each day, Muslims are called to prayer from the minarets of mosques scattered throughout the country. Because Friday is the holiest day for Muslims, the weekend is Thursday and Friday. Starting on the 29th of June 2013, the weekend has been shifted to Friday to Saturday to better serve the Saudi economy and its international commitments. In accordance with Wahhabi doctrine, for many years only 2 religious holidays were publicly recognized: Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. Celebration of other, non-Wahhabi, Islamic holidays, such as the Prophet's birthday and Ashura, an important holiday for Shiites, are tolerated only when celebrated locally and on a small scale. Public observance of non-Islamic religious holidays is prohibited, but in 2006, the 23 September national holiday, which commemorates the unification of the kingdom, was reintroduced over the objections of religious clerics. Saudi Arabia, and specifically the Hejaz, as the cradle of Islam, has many of the most significant historic Muslim sites, including the 2 holiest sites of Mecca and Medina. One of the king's titles is custodian of the 2 holy mosques, the 2 mosques being Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, which contains Islam's most sacred place, the Kaaba, and Al-Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina, which contains Muhammad's tomb. However, Saudi Wahhabism is hostile to any reverence given to historical or religious places of significance for fear that it may give rise to shirk, that is, idolatry. As a consequence, under Saudi rule, the Hejaz cities have suffered from considerable destruction of their physical heritage and, for example, it has been estimated that about 95% of Mecca's historic buildings, most over 1,000 years old, have been demolished. These include the mosque originally built by Muhammad's daughter Fatima, and other mosques founded by Abu Bakr, Muhammad's father-in-law, and the first caliph, Umar, the second caliph, Ali, Muhammad's son-in-law, and the fourth caliph, and Salman al-Farsi, another of Muhammad's companions. Other historic buildings that have been destroyed include the House of Khadijah, the wife of the Prophet, the House of Abu Bakr, now the site of the local Hilton Hotel, the House of Ali Uraid, the grandson of the Prophet, and the Mosque of Abu Qubai, now the location of the King's Palace in Mecca. Critics have described this as Saudi vandalism and claim that over the last 50 years, 300 historic sites linked to Muhammad, his family or companions have been lost. It has been reported that there now are fewer than 20 structures remaining in Mecca that date back to the time of Muhammad. Dress. Saudi Arabian dress strictly follows the principles of hijab, the Islamic principle of modesty, especially in dress. The predominantly loose and flowing, but covering, garments are suited to Saudi Arabia's desert climate. Traditionally, men usually wear an ankle-length garment woven from wool or cotton, known as a thawb, with a keffeh, a large checkered square of cotton held in place by an adul, or a gutra, a plain white square made of finer cotton, also held in place by an adul, worn on the head. For air chilly days, Saudi men wear a camel hair cloak, bisht, over the top. Women's clothes are decorated with tribal motifs, coins, sequins, metallic thread, and appliques. Women are required to wear an abaya or modest clothing when in public. Gutra, Arabic, is a traditional headdress typically worn by Arab men. It is made of a square of cloth, scarf, usually cotton, folded and wrapped in various styles around the head. It is commonly worn in areas with an arid climate, to provide protection from direct sun exposure, and also protection of the mouth and eyes from blown dust and sand. Agal, Arabic, is an item of Arab headgear constructed of cord which is fastened around the gutra to hold it in place. The agal is usually black in color. Thawb, Arabic, is the standard Arabic word for garment. It is ankle length, usually with long sleeves similar to a robe. Bisht, Arabic, is a traditional Arabic men's cloak usually only worn for prestige on special occasions such as weddings. Abaya, Arabic, is a women's garment. It is a black cloak which loosely covers the entire body except the head. Some women choose to cover their faces with a niqab and some do not. Some abayas cover the top of the head as well. Entertainment, the arts, sport and cuisine. During the 1970s, cinemas were numerous in the kingdom although they were seen as contrary to tribal norms. During the Islamic revival movement in the 1980s, and as a political response to an increase in Islamist activism including the 1979 seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, the government closed all cinemas and theaters. However, with King Abdullah's reforms from 2005, some cinemas have reopened. From the 18th century onward, Wahhabi fundamentalism discouraged artistic development inconsistent with its teaching. In addition, Sunni Islamic prohibition of creating representations of people have limited the visual arts, which tend to be dominated by geometric, floral, and abstract designs and by calligraphy. With the advent of royal wealth in the 20th century came exposure to outside influences, such as Western housing styles, furnishings, and clothes. Music and dance have always been part of Saudi life. Traditional music is generally associated with poetry and is sung collectively. Instruments include the rababa, an instrument not unlike a three-string fiddle, and various types of percussion instruments, such as the tabl, drum, and the da, tambourine. Of the native dances, the most popular is a martial line dance known as the Ada, which includes lines of men, frequently armed with swords or rifles, dancing to the beat of drums and tambourines. Bedouin poetry, known as Nabati, is still very popular. Censorship has limited the development of Saudi literature, although several Saudi novelists and poets have achieved critical and popular acclaim in the Arab world, albeit generating official hostility in their home country. These include Ghazi al-Ghasabi, Abd al-Rahman Munif, Turki al-Hamid and Raja al-Sania. Football, soccer, is the national sport in Saudi Arabia. Scuba diving, windsurfing, sailing and basketball are also popular, played by both men and women, with the Saudi Arabian national basketball team winning bronze at the 1999 Asian Championship. More traditional sports such as camel racing became more popular in the 1970s. A stadium in Riyadh holds races in the winter. The annual King's Camel Race, begun in 1974, is one of the sport's most important contests and attracts animals and riders from throughout the region. Falconry, another traditional pursuit, is still practiced. Saudi Arabian cuisine is similar to that of the surrounding countries in the Arabian Peninsula, and has been heavily influenced by Turkish, Persian, and African food. Islamic dietary laws are enforced. Pork is not consumed and other animals are slaughtered in accordance with halal. A dish consisting of a stuffed lamb, known as kuzi, is the traditional national dish. Kebabs are popular, as is shawarma. Shawarma, a marinated grilled meat dish of lamb, mutton, or chicken. As in other Arab countries of the Arabian Peninsula, makbus, kabsa, a rice dish with fish or shrimp, is popular. Flat, unleavened bread is a staple of virtually every meal, as are dates and fresh fruit. Coffee, served in the Turkish style, is the traditional beverage. Society. Saudi society has a number of issues and tensions. A rare independent opinion poll published in 2010 indicated that Saudi's main social concerns were unemployment, at 10% in 2010, corruption and religious extremism. Crime is not a significant problem. However, the government of Saudi Arabia's objective of being a religious Islamic country, coupled with economic difficulties, has created deep social tensions in Saudi society. Many Saudis want a reformed, more secular government and to have more influence in the political process. On the other hand, juvenile delinquency and practices such as ta'afit, drug use and excessive use of alcohol are getting worse. High unemployment and a generation of young males filled with contempt toward the royal family is a significant threat to Saudi social stability. Some Saudis feel they are entitled to well-paid government jobs, and the failure of the government to satisfy this sense of entitlement has led to considerable dissatisfaction. The Shiite minority, located primarily in the eastern province, are subjected to institutionalized government discrimination, inequality and repression. Terrorist attacks in Saudi Arabia have made it clear that Saudi Arabia does harbor indigenous terrorists. According to a 2009 U.S. State Department communication by Hillary Clinton, United States Secretary of State, disclosed as part of the WikiLeaks U.S. cables leaks controversy in 2010. Donors in Saudi Arabia constitute the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. Part of this funding arises through the zakat, an act of charity dictated by Islam, paid by all Saudis to charities, and amounting to at least 2.5% of their income. Although many charities are genuine, others, it is alleged, serve as fronts for money laundering and terrorist financing operations. While many Saudis contribute to those charities in good faith believing their money goes toward good causes, it has been alleged that others know full well the terrorist purposes to which their money will be applied. According to a study conducted by Dr. Noura Al-Suyan, director of the Family Safety Program at the National Guard Hospital, 1 in 4 children are abused in Saudi Arabia. The National Society for Human Rights reports that almost 45% of the country's children are facing some sort of abuse and domestic violence. It has also been claimed that trafficking of women is a particular problem in Saudi Arabia, as the country's large number of female foreign domestic workers and loopholes in the system cause many to fall victim to abuse and torture. Widespread inbreeding in Saudi Arabia, resulting from the traditional practice of encouraging marriage between close relatives, has produced high levels of several genetic disorders including thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, spinal muscular atrophy, deafness and muteness. Women. The U.S. State Department considers Saudi government's discrimination against women a significant problem in Saudi Arabia and notes that women have few political rights due to the government's discriminatory policies. A UN special report on domestic abuse in 2008 noted the absence of laws criminalizing violence against women. The World Economic Forum 2010 Global Gender Gap Report ranked Saudi Arabia 129th out of 134 countries for gender parity. Under Saudi law, every adult female must have a male relative as her guardian. As a result, Human Rights Watch has described the legal position of Saudi women as like that of a minor, with little legal authority over their own lives. Government authorities can force women to obtain the legal permission of a male guardian in order to travel, study, or work. The guardian is legally entitled to make a number of critical decisions on a woman's behalf. Women face discrimination in the courts, where the testimony of one man equals that of two women in family and inheritance law. Polygamy is permitted for men, and men have a unilateral right to divorce their wives, talaq, without needing any legal justification. A woman can only obtain a divorce with the consent of her husband or judicially if her husband has harmed her. In practice, it is very difficult for a Saudi woman to obtain a judicial divorce. With regard to the law of inheritance, the Quran specifies that fixed portions of the deceased's estate must be left to the Quranic heirs. Generally, female heirs receive half the portion of male heirs. A Sunni Muslim can bequeath a maximum of a third of his property to non-Quranic heirs. The residue is divided between agnatic heirs. The average age at first marriage among Saudi females is 25 years in Saudi Arabia. Child marriage exists in Saudi Arabia, however, it is not common. 60% of all university graduates in Saudi Arabia are Saudi women. In 2005 to 2006, women had a 60% dropout rate in college. Female literacy is estimated to be 81%, whereas male literacy is estimated to be higher. The religious police, known as the Mute Tower, impose many restrictions on women in public in Saudi Arabia. The restrictions include forcing women to sit in separate specially designated family sections in restaurants, to wear an abaya and to cover their hair. There is also effectively a ban on women driving. Leading Saudi feminist and journalist, Wajia al-Huda, has said Saudi women are weak, no matter how high their status, even the pampered ones among them, because they have no law to protect them from attack by anyone. The oppression of women and the effacement of their selfhood is a flaw affecting most homes in Saudi Arabia. A number of Saudi women have risen to the top of some professions or otherwise achieved prominence. For example, Dr. Ghada Al-Mutari heads a medical research center in California, and Dr. Salwa Al-Hasa is head of the ophthalmology department at King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Riyadh and was the late King Fahad's personal ophthalmologist. On the 25th of September 2011, King Abdullah announced that Saudi women would gain the right to vote, and to be candidates, in municipal elections, following the next round of these elections. However, a male guardian's permission is required in order to vote. Education is free at all levels. The school system is composed of elementary, intermediate, and secondary schools. A large part of the curriculum at all levels is devoted to Islam, and, at the secondary level, students are able to follow either a religious or a technical track. The rate of literacy, which is 90.4% among males and is about 81.3% among females. Classes are segregated by gender. Higher education has expanded rapidly, with large numbers of universities and colleges being founded, particularly since 2000. Institutions of higher education include the country's first university, King Saud University, founded in 1957, the Islamic University at Medina, founded in 1961, and the King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, founded in 1967. Other colleges and universities emphasize curricula in sciences and technology, military studies, religion, and medicine. Institutes devoted to Islamic studies, in particular, abound. Women typically receive college instruction in segregated institutions. The study of Islam dominates the Saudi educational system. In particular, the memorization by rote of large parts of the Quran, its interpretation and understanding, tafsir, and the application of Islamic tradition to everyday life is at the core of the curriculum. Religion taught in this manner is also a compulsory subject for all university students. As a consequence, Saudi youth generally lacks the education and technical skills the private sector needs, according to the CIA. Similarly, the Chronicle of Higher Education wrote in 2010 that the country needs educated young Saudis with marketable skills and a capacity for innovation and entrepreneurship. That's not generally what Saudi Arabia's educational system delivers, steeped as it is in rote learning and religious instruction. A further criticism of the religious focus of the Saudi education system is the nature of the Wahhabi-controlled curriculum. The Islamic aspect of the Saudi national curriculum was examined in a 2006 report by Freedom House, which concluded that the Saudi public school religious curriculum continues to propagate an ideology of hate toward the unbeliever, that is, Christians, Jews, Shiites, Sufis, Sunni Muslims who do not follow Wahhabi doctrine, Hindus, atheists and others. The Saudi religious studies curriculum is taught outside the kingdom via Saudi-linked madrasa, schools, and clubs throughout the world. Critics have described the education system as medieval and that its primary goal is to maintain the rule of absolute monarchy by casting it as the ordained protector of the faith, and that Islam is at war with other faiths and cultures. The approach taken in the Saudi education system has been accused of encouraging Islamic terrorism, leading to reform efforts to tackle the twin problems of encouraging extremism and the inadequacy of the country's university education for a modern economy. The government is aiming to slowly modernize the education system through the Tatweer Reform Program. The Tatweer Program is reported to have a budget of approximately $2 billion and focuses on moving teaching away from the traditional Saudi methods of memorization and rote learning towards encouraging students to analyze and problem solve. It also aims to create an education system which will provide a more secular and vocationally based training.